Hello everybody, my name is Richard Sears. I will tell you a little bit about my background. I grew up in an all-white, all-English-speaking town of Medford, Oregon. In 1972, at the age of 22, I bought a one-way ticket to Taiwan with the intention of learning Chinese. I spent most of my adult life doing physics and computer science, but I have been speaking Chinese for about 50 years. At the age of 40, I still did not know how to read Chinese. I decided that I needed to learn to read and write Chinese before I died. As a physicist and a computer scientist, I was not accustomed to blind memorization. I have always wanted to know and understand the logic of how everything works. I knew that Chinese characters were derived from pictographs, but when I started looking for the logic behind the characters, I found that there was an incredible amount of garbage, and even the experts had different opinions on the origins of Chinese characters. This ultimately led me to a now 30-year quest to find the pictographic origins of all the normal, everyday Chinese characters. I spent 20 years making a database of almost 100,000 ancient and archaic Chinese characters, and then 10 more years trying to explain the logic behind each character. Finally, in this course, I hope to explain the pictographic origins and logic behind many of the Chinese characters you will have to learn if you want to learn Chinese. I want you to think about the question, what exactly is a Chinese character? You may say it is one of those symbols the Chinese use to write things, but it is more complicated. Chinese characters are called 汉字 in Chinese, but Chinese are not the only people who use Chinese characters. Japanese also use Chinese characters, called kanji. Japanese kanji are almost the same as traditional Chinese characters, but there are some exceptions in the way they write the characters. Koreans also use Chinese characters, called hanza. The same applies. There are some differences from traditional Chinese. The Vietnamese used to use a form of Chinese characters, and even today, the Cantonese speakers in Hong Kong have a large set of characters that are not standard Chinese. These characters are used for the special Cantonese-only words. We will be talking about two main sets of Chinese characters. These are traditional Chinese characters, which have been used mostly unchanged for the past 2,000 years, and are still used in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Southeast Asia, and the simplified Chinese, which have been used in China mainland since the 1960s. To return to the question, what exactly is a Chinese character? It is one of those symbols that the Chinese use to write things. And every part of every Chinese character is ultimately derived from a pictograph. This course will be about the pictographic origins of Chinese characters. When talking about the origins of Chinese characters, I wonder if I should start with simplified characters and work back to traditional characters and the more ancient seal characters, bronze characters, and oracle characters, or should I start from the ancient characters and work forward? So, I will start in the middle with traditional characters and work in both directions. The reason for this is that there is a continuous step-by-step evolution from the original pictographs to the traditional characters. But the transition from traditional characters to simplified characters often involves some obscure rule that may not be obvious by simple observation. It may require a more lengthy explanation. What exactly is a traditional Chinese character? What you see here is a poem called Lanting Jishu, the Orchid Pavilion. It is a famous poem preface written by a famous calligrapher named Wang Xizhi. It was written in 353 AD. It is about the fragility and shortness of life. I will talk about it later, but it is an example of handwritten traditional Chinese characters from around 1600 years ago. A traditional Chinese character is a fuzzy set of characters that should allow you to read more than 99.99% of texts from any period in the past 1800 years. Since about 200 AD, Chinese have been printing characters in either Li style or Kai style, which are basically the forms of characters used today. We cannot define a traditional character as any old Kai or Li character. Most of the tens of thousands of characters you may find in a large dictionary were never commonly used by Chinese, either in ancient or in modern times. The Kangxi Dictionary has been a standard dictionary since 1716. It has over 47,000 characters. About 40,000 of those characters are so rare that the average modern Chinese will never see them in a lifetime. Find a reasonable set of characters that will include maybe 99.99% of Chinese texts, either modern or classical. 8,000 characters is a pretty complete set. Taiwan published a list of 4,808 characters called the Changyong Guozi Biaojun Ziti Biao. If you know all of those characters, you can recognize 99.9% of modern Chinese. We could say traditional Chinese characters are the 4,808 characters from the Changyong Guozi Biaojun Ziti Biao. Before traditional characters, we had seal characters, which were used during the Qin and Han dynasties, between 221 BC and 200 AD. In 221 BC, Qin Shi Huang came to power and declared that the proliferation of Chinese characters had become too complicated. He assigned his Prime Minister Li Si to make a standard set of official characters. These are called seal characters. Here is a stone from the Tai Mountain cut 2,200 years ago. Qin Shi Huang ordered Li Si to write a list of his achievements on this stone. These characters are not recognized by most modern Chinese. He also declared that all old documents should be destroyed. This unification and 2,200 years of history mean that very few written artifacts survive from before 221 BC. The characters of the Eastern Han are well known and understood thanks to the dictionary by Shu Shen called Shouwen Jie, written in about 147 AD. Our earliest copy of the Shouwen dates to the Song dynasty, but we think the existing copies are fairly accurate accounts of the original and of the time. This style of characters lasted until about 200 AD, but have been used continuously for some official documents and for official seals, thus the name seal characters. The proper name should be Qin Han characters, or characters of the Qin and Han dynasty. In my research, I use several sources for Qin Han characters. The Shouwen is like the Rosetta Stone of Chinese. Without it, it would have been almost impossible to decipher the texts of the Zhou and Shang dynasties. It is also apparent that Shu Shen had little or no access to texts before 221 BC. When we compare his description to earlier archaeological artifacts, we find that many, perhaps 30%, of his descriptions have some degree of error, ranging from minor to just plain wrong. Shu Shen is still a great man. the Galileo of Chinese etymology. I will mention a bit about the 说文解字, the Chinese Rosetta Stone. 说文解字 is the earliest existing Chinese dictionary. It describes the seal characters that were used in the Han Dynasty. Is it an etymological dictionary? It does not really discuss etymology. It is more like a spelling book that tells you the components and if they are phonetic or not, but does not discuss the logic of why they are combined the way they are. So it is not really an etymological dictionary, but has valuable structural information and has a lot of alternate characters and characters which Xu Shen considered to be more ancient. So it has a lot of etymological information. Is it a dictionary? It is not a dictionary in the usual sense. The so-called explanations are little more than reminders of what the character means. A particular kind of plant may be just described by the word a plant, not by any useful description. Some characters are described by characters that sound the same, only telling you how the character was supposed to be pronounced, but not what it actually meant. It is clear that Xu Shen had little or no access to Zhou Dynasty characters, and his guesses of the etymology are frequently wrong, including the things he thinks are phonetics. About 23% of modern characters have been invented since Xu Shen's dictionary. Although he may frequently be wrong, we need to remember that he was speaking from his understanding of the characters as they were 2,000 years ago. So his opinion should be considered and evidence given before discarding his opinion. If he thinks something is a phonetic, he must have had some reason for thinking so. If he gives an explanation, we must consider why he thought it was that way. Liu Shutong is a dictionary of alternate and extra seal characters that show about 48,000 seal characters and alternates, or variants, that were collected from the Qin to the Ming dynasties. It is very useful for etymology, showing many characters that cannot be found in the Shouwen, and they give insight into possible origins of bronze and oracle characters. There are also a lot of artistic forms.